Hi everyone. In this particular demo, I'm going to be doing a northern female cardinal, but I'm going to be leaning it towards the hyper-realistic side. Now, my main reference that I'll be going from, the tail is already blown out of focus because of lack of depth of field. Now, this I went over in my photo reference video just before this one, so I will actually put up a link to it again up on top. But now, with that in mind, I'm going to also go over the brushes. Now, the setup I'm in right now, looking around, this is my layout for brush design. I have it set up in a very specific way, and then I'm also going to have several different layouts, one without a doubt, or even two, for extra large photos to do photo retouch and photo work and photo art, because keep in mind, these photographs coming into this program, which could handle it no problem at all, opening them up and saving them. And that is as much as a 60 by 30 at 300 DPI. And some of those files are in excess of 200 megs to import and export. So now with that in mind, I will have my own layouts with those. And then also, even if I decide to do some a little bit more on the impressionistic scenery side, then I'll also have different layouts for those. But in this particular demo, I'm going to use two particular brushes that I'll go over each and how I made them from scratch. And what I mean by that is, the one is a dab brush, and it will have different lengths of strokes. I created different ones, and it has a specific length to it before it runs out of paint. But I'm not interested in that as much as I am interested in, once it runs out of paint, then it turns into a blender. So what I could do is put down a specific amount of paint at my choice, and then actually turn it into a blender and start blending right away to what's already there if I want to have loose and soft edges. Now, if you want to have art edges, then that's not an issue. But then the other one is my feather brush, that I created a couple of feather brushes, and those will have what is considered a bearing setup. So in other words, if I have my pen facing at 10 o'clock, at 12 o'clock, or even at 2 o'clock, then what will happen is that is the vertical axis of that brush. And I will actually be able to control exactly how the feather linear patterns go down on my actual bird. And I will actually get to the point where I may put down one at a time at the very end, so I can completely control the angles, the thickness, the colors, everything. But this will give me the opportunity to build up an underlayer of a very subtle feather pattern that I could build off of rather quickly. Now, those brushes, I will definitely go over how I set them up and how I will use them. But in the meantime, as far as the way this particular program works, I am actually rethinking my whole painting process, and I very well may consider changing my panels and my setup halfway through the painting just because of what I'm reaching for and why. So with that said, let's go into our photo references and go from there. Okay, again, this is my brush setup, one of the layouts that I use. And if I want to toggle, all I have to do is toggle from this brush setup back to my painting setup. And I could do that anytime just by clicking this button. Then that way, if I really want to work on a brush or adjust it or change it, I can immediately go to this setup and then completely revise that brush. And then either save it as a new brush or export it as a different brush, or save it as a different brush. Now, for now, though, we're just going to open up our Cardinal reference just to get us started. And I want to show you, and I'm just using image glass for this. And I'm going to have the other one ready here. But what I want to show you is this right here. And again, this is just the limitations of photography. This is the picture I'm going to mainly be working from, with just the feather patterns and the colors and the shapes and everything. But what I want to show you is the tail. It is already badly out of focus enough that I'm not going to be able to get too much detail from that. So with that in mind, I have another photo I used previously in another Cardinal painting, and this is it right here, and this is the photo I will use for it. Now, the most important thing to notice here is, if you notice, this is important. These are the leading edges right here and right here of the tail feathers. So as they fold, this one is out front, and then the next one will overlap it, and the next one will overlap it, and so on. Now here's the important point we have to put. The rachis, which is right here, if you want to call it the main shaft of the feather itself, is on the leading edge on this side of the tail, but then on this side, it's on the opposite side. So that is the leading edge of these feathers over here. But then as you go towards the center of the tail, so does the rachis. It becomes closer and closer to the center of the tail feathers. So that's very important that if we want to keep that accurate, then we have to do that. And then also keep in mind that the very trailing edge of the tail, these are also the shortest feathers, and then they get slightly longer as it goes towards the center. Now we'll keep all that in mind when we start painting, but then again, like I said, this is again just some of the things we have to keep in mind if we want to try and paint this cardinal as accurately as we possibly can. Okay, let's move on to the brush design. Now I'm not going to go over all these different controls. There are plenty of good tutorials that can really cover brush design thoroughly, but what I want to show you is just the two brushes I designed for the specific painting. And now also I'll be obviously using those in future paintings many different ways, but the way they work is the most important. Now this is the first brush we're going to go over. It's just my dab brush that I designed, and what I want to do is show you why I designed it, but first we'll go over what it does. And that is, if I go to the general controls, I will open it up, and there again, all of these different settings are pretty much typical. The angle jitter, stroke jitter, opacity jitters, they're all involved in there. But this is what I want the most, blending. At the bottom of blending, I have the option to check this box and to dry out to transparency. And then depending on where this is set is how quick or slow it dries out the paint to transparency. Now right now my short one is on 300, and that's this one right here. And what I will do is zoom in and show you how this is going to work. We'll make it nice and big so we can see what we're doing, and then watch this number as I change brushes. But first what I'm going to do is grab permanent rows. We'll use that right here, and then I'm going to make sets of 4 for each one, and we'll see what happens. I'll start right here and go down the whole way to the bottom, and then you could already see what's going on. That what I want to show you is when the brush runs out of paint, it turns into a blender and picks up the color below. So what I want to then do is go to medium. This jumped up to 500. It was 300. Now we'll see what goes on with that one. I'll just kind of put parallel strokes alongside each other. You could see what's going on. We'll do this in real time. And now this is my medium. If I go to the long, this jumped up to 1,000. We'll do 4 of those. And again, you can see where this is going. But I want to show you. There's the 4th one. And then now if I go up to the extra long, this jumps up to 1,500. And we'll do 4 of those. And then now you could see that they all run out of paint, each set of 4, right here, right here, right here, and right here. Now, this is the different amount of paint that particular brush setting is holding, but then how can we use this in the practical sense? Now, when it runs out of paint, that is great, but I'm using it in a blend method. And let's go to that next and show you how that would work. Okay, let's show you a blend method. I'm going to close this down, and I'm going to turn this off. And we are going to move this up, and I'm going to zoom in a little wee bit on this, and then I will stick with the dab short for now. Or we'll start with the dab medium. And what I want to do is go to the goldenrod, And I will even turn on the transparent log just to get us started. And just say, for example, I just put down a quick coat of my quinacridone gold just to start this actual goldenrod leaf. Now, if I want to put in some burnt sienna or maybe even raw umber, let's go with the raw umber. Now, since I'm on my medium dab, we know it's going to run out of paint. So if I start with the raw umber, it's already out of paint. So now what I'm going to do is just blend that amount. Now, as soon as I lift up, I will be able to put more paint down without doing anything else. And this way I can actually use the paintbrush as a blender without changing any modes or anything, and then constantly going back in. If I want to add some up here, then I could put down a specific amount. Now keep in mind, if I need more up here, then all I have to do is lift up and go back down again, and I'll add another specific amount of paint. And this way I could keep on painting just about as quick as I possibly can. And then if I want to go with a burnt sienna and add it in here, I'll do the same thing. I'll run out of paint, and then it'll start blending into my quinacridone gold and my raw umber. Now, if I want to actually maybe put a white edge on here, then I could go back to my unbleached titanium and start right here. And then if I want a hard white edge, put it in some direct light, then I could do that same thing. And then I'll run out of paint and just start blending that into my quinacridone gold. But then if I need more white, lift up. As soon as I touch down again, I'll be adding more paint. And then that would be it. Now I would be able to blend that in. And then say, for example, as I go around underneath of it, I want to darken it up a little bit. Go back to the burnt sienna, darken it up. Stay with all my values of yellows, browns, what have you. And then just move that and blend that in. And if I want a nice dark vein here, let's say, for example, especially depending on the way the light is, the light's coming from my upper left, but I want it to make it look like it's curved up and then back down, then that means I would want a hard dark edge here on a straight edge on the left side, but then a blended edge on the right side. So if I use a real dark sepia color, then I could leave the left side real sharp and blend in, feather it out on the right side. And that's it, I would be done. And then this is just how I could use these different set of brushes. Now, some of these, this extra long, if it takes too long to run out, or depending on what type of a painting I'm doing, I may need a lot of one color. Then I'll determine whether I could fine tune them or even fine tune each brush as I go. But for now, I'm definitely going to keep this particular set of these in my detail category and then go from there and see how this will work. But now, let's go on. This is the daub setting and how paint could run out and then how you could use that to your benefit. But let's go on to the actual feathers, and we'll check out that next and see how that could benefit our painting in a very specific, very quick way. Okay, now what I will do next is I want to show you the brush shapes first. I'm going to turn off the actual transparent lock, and then I'm going to go to the feathers. And what I want to do is zoom back out for this one. And this is a very specific setup. And what I want to first show you is, again, these two custom shapes I made. These are feathers. One tapers from the top and then fans out towards the bottom. And then the other one is just the exact opposite, just to give a nice mixture. Now, these are only 5 lines a piece, and I just made those just by using my Series 7 brush. And I call it Series 7 because then I know what that means exactly. That's just a real fine spotter brush that I can make needle sharp endings with it or start it. Now, what I'll do with this two shapes here is we're going to go to that brush now, and just say, for example, I'm going to leave the feathers on, And if I go to my animal patterns, that's where I have them for now. Here's the feather one. And I'll go to just like, say, a nice, let's go to a raw umber, and that's just a straight color. But if I go to the stylus setting, I set up something here for you just to show how this would work. And I'll put down the stylus. Now keep in mind, in the this adjustment here, if I go to the blending, that's where we were. That's where we could dry out. Now this doesn't have a dry out. I don't want it to dry out. But if I go to angle on this one, now this one, out of all the adjustments I can make, it is set at bearing, which is very interesting. Not pressure, not tilt, not velocity, and especially not random, because I would not want this random. If I have this particular brush set up at random, that means I cannot control the angle of the patterns and how they would actually fall in place. But if I actually work with the bearing setting as it was, right here, I have this, and then the angle is just slightly adjustment, and then the squeeze is nothing more than whether it fans it out or squeezes it together. I just have it at 100%, and then what that will do is it will actually just give me my dab as is. Now I'll close this out, and then here is what I get. Now if I go straight across, this is what I would normally get. Oh, let's go to the right. Let's go to the right layer here. And if I go straight across, this is what I would normally get. I'll make it a little bit bigger just to show you a little bit better. And then that's my radius up here. Now, if I would normally use any type of brush, this is what I would get. And depending on how it could work, it might scatter them around a little bit, adjust the size, scatter the opacity, the angle, and then maybe the spacing. But because I have a bearing adjustment, this is what I would get. If I hold my pen just like this, then this is what I get. If I hold my pen just like this is what I get. And if I hold my pen like this, then this is what I get. Now what I'm actually getting is my feather patterns in the vertical axis I exactly want. So that means if I want my feathers to look like they're going around the body, I can. Or more importantly, if I want to bring my reference back in, and if I want them to go different angles, then all I have to do is, say for example, if I want to paint these feathers, then I have to have my actual stylus pen in this angle. Same thing is the same angle as the feathers I want to paint. So if I want them in this angle, then if I keep my stylus at this angle, then these are the feathers I could paint. And moving on to these down in here, these subtle ones down here, if I keep my stylus at this angle, then I could paint these feathers, and they will be at the same angle as the ones on my bird. Now these in here, if I start interlocking very subtly or overlapping something, I may go down to just moving one stroke at a time just to fine tune my feathers. But in the meantime, I can actually use this system to actually really lay down just very subtle values of changes, especially if I'm using my harmonies, which you'll see in the painting mode, that what I do is that way I can then take real subtle changes of colors, just like they are here, and overlap them and start really building up depth and texture, and then end up with the very darkest ones or the most obvious ones that I will actually use, and that would be just like these yellow ones. But what I'll have to do, obviously, is start building up darker values first, and then end up with the lighter values. And then you could obviously see that the colors of the feathers obviously change as you go to the top, and then even like these here, I will end up with just a touch of deep red over the browns and burnt umbers. Now that we have gone over how these two brushes are going to work, let's dive in and get some speed painting done. Okay, I had this drawn up in Rebel 4, and I was actually very curious that I wanted to paint it in Corel Painter. So I actually had the PSD ready to go and I transferred it in, but I just wanted to include the drawing and what I had of it, just to keep it all together. Okay, I'm just starting with the background. Just working in the background, I may make a couple layers of the background colors just to be able to make them darker, but then I'll have the opportunity to turn some of the layers on or off to see what I like most. Doing an opaque painting, I handle it quite differently than a watercolor painting. Watercolor paintings, I have to work from light to dark with no return. If you want to lighten something up, you may be in trouble. Sometimes you have to indirectly darken something else up to lighten other objects within the painting. With opaque paints, I could always go back in and lighten or darken anything up. Here I'm making a selection area, and what I could do is actually save that selection area for further reference. So if you spend the time to do an actual selection area, then you could save it and bring back up that same selection area at any time. When you save it as a RIF file, RIF, and then what it will do is actually save those selection areas for you that you've saved with the painting. So even if you close out and reopen the painting, those selected areas will still be saved and able to bring back up at any time. Here I'm rearranging the tail. I was not happy with the shapes of the feathers, and I wanted to just widen up the tops of them. They were a little bit too cylindrical and too parallel before. Now I'm just slowly correcting them. And again, I'm not above going back in and rearranging things as I see things progress. And I will block in the eye and the black around the beak itself. And I'm just getting started as to where all my shapes and values are going to be, and then I'll just slowly refine them with a smaller and smaller brush. Now blocking in the goldenrod again, I'll actually put some sawtooth detail in some of the actual areas of the leaves, and they also have a specific direction, so that will also actually help you determine what angle or what direction the leaf is going. If you're seeing the back side of the leaf or the front side of the leaf, and if it's curled up, then you can make sense of where those sawtooth angles are. Adding different colors to the actual goldenrod, I'm still working in the different areas. And being that the goldenrod are on their own layer by themselves, I could go back in and even erase some out if I need to and not disturb anything else. Once I bring up the selection pattern again, I could go back in and do anything I need, whether it be laying down a real fine dot pattern. And then what I will actually do is bring up a particle brush and lay down a pattern with it too. It makes a very fine, crackly looking pattern that I could build off of that also. But then I will only be applying it to the leaves and not the stems. Just trying to keep in with that dried leaf look, that they are weathered and some of them have very subtle pale greens to them. I will actually finish this out. Let's take a look and see what we have. Okay, let's take a look and see what we have. Now these commands here, just to go over those real quick, I actually even have to drop out of full screen mode just to show you. And the reason why is the main menu, I don't use 95% of any of that as I'm painting. So I'm really finding it useful to just make myself a couple of quick commands and then just click on them and use them from there. Now, if I want to add to this, then all I have to do is hit Window and then hit Custom Palette, Add Command. And let's say, for example, I want to add something to the brush jar, then all I have to do is hit the drop down, hit Brush Jar, and then say I wanted to add Select All. I could go right up here and it would be just like hitting the command out of the main menu and click on All. It will put on All down here, and if I hit OK, it will add Select All to my brush jar. And this works really good along with the brushes, that if I don't want to go back through all of the different categories and try to find a brush out of each one, that if I'm using some blenders, if I'm using a selection tool like this one right here, and then any of the other tools, specialty tools or texture tools, then I would have to go back through each category and find each brush. But if I actually just go to any of the brushes and just grab it, all I have to do is hit Shift and left click and drag it down here and drop it, and that's it. And then now if I click this one, it's going to go back to the selection tools and the brush that it is. If I click this one, it'll go back to the category it's in and then what brush it is. And if I don't want these, say for example, I'm done with this one, then all I have to do is right click on it, hit delete, and it's gone. That works great. Now, getting to the selection area, I could go back, and I've been working out of full screen mode quite a bit, only because I don't have to use the menu as long as I have the ones I need right here. So now with the selection, being able to save a selected area is downright brilliant for me. This is the first opportunity I ever had to do that, to be honest with you. And for that reason, it will also give you the exact same selected area, which is very important. If you select a specific area and then you want to go back and try to select that same area, you might get something slightly different only because you're not able to select that exact same area. For example, if I actually go on any one of these layers, just say for example the wing, if I hit load selection that I pulled out of my main menu, if I hit load selection, it will give me the transparency of that layer right away as my default choice. Now, if I want to just replace that, add to it, subtract to it, intersect, that's if I already have a actual selected area given before I open this one up. Now, if I hit OK, then all it's going to do is just give me whatever's on that layer, and that's it. So for that reason, if I say, for example, now want to just show you how I would open up my saved selected area of my goldenrod leaves, then I could go to the same one, load selection, but I'll hit the drop down, and then there's my saved goldenrod leaves. So now I could either replace this selection, add to it, subtract from it, or intersect with it, depending on where this selected area was compared to my goldenrod leaves. I just want to replace it and then hit OK. It will deselect the wing and then select just the leaves of the actual selected area I made throughout the painting. Now, if I want to actually go to my selection tool, then my options come up here on top. And again, this is how I have this set up for me, that if I don't want to see the marquee anymore, I could hit that button. But if I want to see it filled in, then I could hit this button and that'll show the color that it is. If I don't want to see anything, I could turn that off, but the selected area is still there. So for that reason, if I want to just work on the leaves and then just give them a very specific pattern, just say, for example, this particle brush here, if I click on it, and I'm going to zoom in, and I will show you, I'm not going to save it as is, just to give you an example, because I already did some of the black. But if I go to just say some like the white, that I could show white, and then that will really show you what it'll do. If I put down some of these, it's only going to apply that particular texture to the actual leaves themselves, because that's the selected area. But it's a very interesting, like, crackly pattern that when I did it in black, you could see it all over here and there. And then I'll go back in and work over some of that, and then maybe even add a little bit back to it, because I could do that anytime I want, since I could bring up that exact same selected area. But the white, this is what this will do. And then if I do that, I could also then adjust that brush if I want to. If I hit toggle layout, I will hit the toggle layout, and that will go to now my other layout that would be the exact layout I use to design brushes with. And then if I want to adjust that particle brush in a way, I could go to it, and these are all the commands I have for that particle brush. And again, I could change what expression I want for that particle brush. If I wanted to react to pressure, to bearing, this is just for example, the wheel to tilt, rotation, anything at all, or just none, like some of the other ones are. But because I have it already set up bearing, I'll just leave it there. But then the count is how many particles will be actually creating lines, and then the chaos, we will get into that at another time. There is a lot to go over with in this particular program, but what we're going to do right now is I'll close this out, and I'll hit my toggle button right here. It's barely noticeable. It changed a little bit on me in the other setup, and then now I'm back in my other setup to paint from. But now keep in mind, I am actually even evolving around that. I might even shorten up some of this and get rid of some of these and even give myself more room to paint with, because I'm finding some of these quick commands are very useful, that I could really cut down the space I need to work with, or even just work in a different way, that if I have my actual layers over here now, then what I could do is actually just change things around, and I'm only going to be working in this area right in here if I need any kind of controls. Then now nothing is over here, and this is the first time I've ever done that. I've always had my layers on the right side, but then I had to put my hand beyond that to work with the layers panel. So now everything is right here, and my right hand is staying to the right of all of my work area. So I'm already finding this better, but there might be just a little bit of time that I will need to get used to it. With all this gone over, let's get some more speed painting done. Okay, I'm just continuing on with the goldenrod leaves, just refining the shapes more and more as I go, working with lights and darks, changing the values more and more subtly as I go also. This will slowly refine my shapes the way I want them and the way they work the best with what I had to work with as a reference. Now, if I understand how the leaves are, what makes them tick, so to speak, then I can make subtle adjustments or even create my own leaves, knowing that they could be accurate in the world. Here I changed the shape of one. It was running directly into the other leaf, and it made it look like one long leaf. That would be referred to as a tangent in the composition world, and that was a little wee bit deceiving, so I decided to rearrange one leaf. Now I'm readjusting the actual selected area since I changed the outer perimeters of some of the leaves. One great thing about saving selected areas, if I wanted my original selected area for any reason, I could keep it, change that selected area, and then just save it as a new selection area. This way I would have both if I need one or the other, depending on what areas I want to work. Now, selected areas work great if I actually want to apply a specific texture, like the particle brush or the spot brush. There's real fine spots that we're laying down, and we will go over those here shortly. Working on the wing, it was interesting that halfway down the wing, on the top half you see the outside of the wing, then the feathers curl in, and then you see the underside of the feathers and the wing. This is adjusted and refined more by putting that subtle tan brown on the top of the wing and at the top of the picture. Working with the selected area now, this gives me a chance to create my feathers within the body shape, though I don't have to worry about going outside the line, so to speak. Now, one big difference with the body is that I made plenty of layers with individual feathers on each one. This was so I could actually use my transparent lock to lock on the feathers themselves, so I could go back in and change the values of each set of feathers. In a traditional painting, that would be a nightmare, trying to adjust one single stroke from start to finish. If I did this type of a painting in a traditional sense, I would use plenty of blot paper to check my values before I put them to the painting. Nice thing about digital is I can always undo it if it's not the right value I want, or if it's a little bit too loud compared to the colors or values around it. also working with digital, it gives me the chance to use that transparent lock so I could go back in and refine the exact areas I want. Let's take a look and see what we have. Okay, let's take a look and see what we have. And again, this is a 16 by 20 at 300 dpi. Now, the reason why I bring that up is I want to show you a couple of different things. First, I know my print size on my monitor is 34%. That is based on always that I use 300 dpi to paint on, and then also the actual dpi of my monitor. So if I change this to 34, this is what I want to view my painting at. It is very important to view your painting at print size, only because that is what you would get if you send it out to be printed. So now with that in mind, I'm going to tab this and get rid of everything. So now that this is since a 16 by 20, it's pretty big, and I normally don't paint birds, small songbirds this big, meaning that it is way bigger than life. Because if this is 16 from here over to here, on my screen, it is actually 16 inches wide. So the way I see this on my screen now is how it would print. And again, that's very important because I want to see what's going on and how detailed this painting actually looks. Now, if I start making it bigger, or if I have the ability to artificially pump up the size of this painting, that's great. But the only problem is you got to make sure that as you pump it up, it doesn't start to fall apart. And if you start losing too much detail, then the painting is going to look half finished if it's printed bigger than print size. And that is just something for you to think about as an artist. Now, if I actually go to this, look at this area here. Now, this is the area I'm going to finish in part 2. I will go back in and actually build up layers of very subtle patterns underneath, and then also change some of the values of the top feathers. But this is what I was talking about, that has that zebra pattern look, that it's just a linear pattern of lighter feathers on top and then the base color on the bottom, and that's it. Technically, that is not complicated enough to establish a feather pattern with depth. And what I mean by that is if we go down to the underbelly area, this is where I built up plenty of layers. And I did each layer of feathers on its own layer so I could go back and use the actual transparency lock to isolate those feathers so I could lighten them or darken them just a little bit at a time so I could build up all these different layers so you actually can't see the base coat of what color it is. You just keep seeing patterns of feathers that go darker and darker that would actually be closer to the skin of the bird. And then that way, right in here is such an in-depth pattern that you look at feathers and you actually see feathers. Where then now these lighter colored ones here are around the edge of the rib cage, that then these are actually the whitest ones because they would be closest to the outside light. But now again, here is where I put that subtle brownish on the wing, because right in here, down to about right in here, this is the top of the wing, but then the feathers curl under, and then now this is where you start to see the underside of the wing. So I cannot do that same brown, because now you're seeing the inside of this feather, where this is the outside of that same feather. And they kind of twist as they go around the body. That is just the natural shape of those feathers. But now just looking around at the beak and everything, I could clean these up. And what I want to show you in part 2 is how I could control some of these shapes. And if I want to manipulate something, layer masks are really great to do that. It gives you the opportunity to experiment and change things around without committing to it. That way, if you want it, you can apply the layer mask. Then you could also delete the layer mask if you don't think there's no change needed at all, or it doesn't better with what you want. I will also make some of these feathers lighter and just more or less clean things up. And then I also might put some snow on the goldenrod, but I have to be very careful where I put that, because it's going to be real white patches, obviously, of snow on the given different leaves, and they will be eye grabbers. So I have to be careful where I put them and just kind of put them around in a random way, but also in a way that's more or less keeps the viewer moving throughout the painting. And then also, I may also make the sky a little bit darker, or just actually what this would be is the background brush and trees. And then from here up would be more or less like the cloudy, dark sky of winter. Down here, I could even put some more browns of just goldenrod out in the distance, out of focus, or just also just make things a little bit darker. But the more texture I introduce to the background, I have to be really careful with that, only so I actually don't take away attention from my subject. Now, with this said, let's finish this up in part 2, and then we will actually see where this one goes from here. But we covered a lot of things. There is a lot of things to cover in this program, and I will try to get into each and every tool and technique I use for each given painting. With that said, let's put things back the way they were, and with as many layers as I had to work with. Until part 2, or we see you out in the field or back at the studio, thanks for watching.